This is The Strange Recital, a podcast about fiction which questions the nature of reality.
Elzy woke to cold, the scent of cold, of snow, of tent fabric. The coldness felt good on her hot skin. Confusion. She wasn't in her room. The child fell asleep again before she could figure it out. Nothing seemed worth thinking through. Her head hurt. Her chest hurt. Her tummy hurt. Her breath wouldn't come right. She slept again. She woke, Daddy feeding her soup. It tasted funny. Daddy had put something in it to make her feel better. "Try to have some," he said. "You have to stay hydrated." "Where's Jamie?" "Shh," said Daddy. Consciousness came and went. She snuggled down under blankets in her sleeping bag, shivering, then struggled out of her bag and threw off the blankets, burning up. In the daytime, the walls were luminous. She was in a tent. She kept forgetting that. To poo, she had to go outside and squat in the snow. She always had to poo. Her butt hurt. Her breath, reflected back at her face from the inside of her sleeping bag, burned her eyes. She had a moment of clarity, a fledgling analysis. I have a fever, so my breath is too hot for my eyes. And my sleeping bag is wet because I'm sweating, even though I feel cold. It's because I have a fever. But mostly she couldn't think much. Then she had to poo again. There had been other people. When she was awake enough to think through anything, she could remember that. The camping trip, not to either of the campgrounds, Blackwoods or Seawall, but to a spot way up in the woods that they had to hike to. Carrying all their stuff, so much stuff. All of it heavy, uphill through the snow, with Daddy and Jamie and those two women who were Daddy's friends. And their kid, who was Elzy's own age, but seemed sort of shy or maybe stuck up, and then started coughing and turned blotchy. "I'm going to remember everything for show and tell when we get back to school," Elzy had said. "We're not going back," Jamie had told her. "You don't know anything." She hated it when he got that superior tone just because he was older, but he was right. She hardly knew anything, and that was almost okay, because he would explain it all to her eventually. He always did. But then everybody got sick, spotted and blotchy, and the others went into separate tents or something because they weren't around anymore, and everything got confusing, and Elzy couldn't think right or breathe right. And now she had to go poo again. "Daddy?" Daddy had been gone a long time. She went to sleep while he wasn't in the tent, and when she woke up, he still wasn't there. "Daddy?" When he got back, he looked tired and sad and sort of gray in the face. He sat down on the sleeping pad just like he used to sit on the edge of her bed back home. He asked all his questions. Are you warm? Cold? Hungry? Thirsty? How's your tummy? He felt her forehead, asked her to breathe deep so he could listen. This time when she breathed, she didn't cough, though breathing still hurt. She didn't really feel like talking. She sort of fell asleep, but not really. Nothing much was really anything these days. She lay there, sort of sleeping, but not really. And Daddy rubbed her ear so she felt a little better. After a while, Daddy spoke. "It's just you and me now, kid," he said. "But don't worry, I can take care of us. We have plenty of food, plenty of ammunition. I know lots of wild plants we can eat, and there's deer here. We can have a garden, too. You'll like having a garden. There's fish in the lake. I'll teach you to fly fish. How about that? No one will find us. We'll be safe here. Don't worry. But there's one thing I need you to do for me, Elzy. Elzita. Elzy girl. I need you to just not die. Not now, because I need to have somebody to care for. I can't do this alone. The inside of the tent smelled cold and musty, and the daylight through the tent walls was starting to fade. Elzy never afterwards remembered him saying that. But for the rest of her life, when she thought about those weeks in the tent, while one world, one life ended, and something else began, she wondered if something just like that had been said. Elzy Rodriguez checked into her favorite inn, took a shower, and got halfway through getting dressed before the lovely spring air distracted her. In sports bra and trousers, she stood just inside the balcony doorway, breathing and listening to the clip-clop of horse carts and the whine of an electric cop car in the street. Children's voices argued from somewhere, and a crow in the winter-bare branches of the oak tree across the street cawed once, twice, 3 times. The deep whistle blast of the big coastal ferry, just now leaving port, startled her, but did not startle the crow. Elzy didn't like the hustle and bustle of civilization, but her contribution to the food reserve was due, and she took her responsibilities as a landholder seriously. She held the land, and the land held her. Not much else ever had. At least civilization had hot showers. The door opened behind her. Elzy spun reflexively, ready for self-defense as a young man walked in. "Oh, hey," he said, his eyes dropping briefly to her breast. "Is this, He seemed to notice her defensive stance and looked around at the bed, the open bathroom door, the items of clothing and other personal gear strewn about. Why are you in my room?" she asked. "Wow, I was just trying to find the balcony. I thought this was a common area. I'll just be going." His voice sounded pleasant, affable, and Anglophone Canadian. "No, I give you permission to stay," she told him. He was slim and golden, with guileless, boyish features and short, straight, chestnut-colored hair. There was something odd about his eyes. She hadn't seen epicanthic folds in a long time, but once she knew what she was seeing, his eyes didn't look strange anymore. He blushed under her scrutiny and rubbed the back of his head. She pulled on her tunic and beckoned for him to follow her out to the balcony. Bar Harbor, Maine, spread out before them. "So, who are you?" she asked. "Kevin Williams. I just got into town. I build boats." "Oh? What kind of boats?" "What kind do you need?" Typical salesman, except that she actually did need a boat. Come to think of it, she might need several boats. "Kayak or canoe," she told him. "I just want something so I can noodle around on my pond. I'm the Long Pond caretaker." "I can definitely do either." "Do you travel?" "Easier for you to take me home than a finished canoe." Many craftspeople worked at clients' homes in order to avoid delivery costs. Without fossil fuel, transportation had gotten expensive. But Kevin clearly meant something else, too. His forwardness made Elzy cough. Can we just talk about boats for now?" she said. "Of course." But he did not seem overly chastened. They talked business for some minutes and exchanged contact information. Belatedly, she gave him her name. He lingered. Well, she'd said he could. She finished getting ready to go out as if he wasn't there, putting on her blue and green cowl and neatly tipping its hood back off her head. She spread oil through her still damp afro with her fingers, then affixed a small silver pin to her chest. Kevin's eyes widened at the sight of that pin. She turned to face him. "Kevin," she said, with a hint of fond familiarity, "I will see you again, but not tonight." He stammered and fidgeted and showed himself out. For a moment, she regretted not asking him to dinner. She had no other commitments tonight, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like a teenager. She needed time and space to decide whether to act like one. Leaving the inn, she stepped out into the first really warm day of the year and wandered down to the water and the path that runs between the lawns of the grand old houses and the shelving rock of the seashore. She looked out across the water that gives Bar Harbor its name. The tide, hurrying to its lowest point, had left behind hundreds of stranded lion's mane jellyfish, like a storm of misplaced red pancakes. Sailboats, rowboats, and both electric and biodiesel powerboats rode at mooring buoys or picked their way between aquaculture allotments. A seal lifted its head from the greenish water and submerged again. She wondered what it was like to be a seal. And every few minutes, Kevin would pop back into her mind, usually naked. But after the naked bit, her mind would run on to where the casual sex would inevitably become complicated by emotional attachment. And then it would all go wrong. Elzy had never had a truly bad romance, but she'd never had a really good one either. And they all ended the same way, and she never knew why. If I'm smart, I'll stay away from this guy, she thought. And yet, by that logic, Bar Harbor and its hot showers should not exist. 35 years ago, it hadn't existed. People always said the pandemic, as though that explained the collapse. But Elzy knew it was dependence, not disease, that killed the old civilization. Dependence on fossil fuel and its overcomplicated supply chains. When too many people lost their places in the line, the whole thing snapped, and billions of people starved. Those who survived, like Elzy and her father, did so by becoming self-sufficient, defending tiny garden patches and hunting grounds, one family or several together, each group alone. Why hadn't the survivors stayed that way, isolated and safe? The new society was not as brittle as the old one, but it was hardly invulnerable. A smart people would have remained hidden under their rocks. Elzy was glad people had not been smart. When the shadows grew long and began eroding the day's thin warmth, she headed back uphill towards the town center. At the weekend market, vendors were packing up for the day as the crowd gathered around the gazebo on the green. But the headliner of the evening was listed as Henry the Horrible and his marvelous singing parrots. So she decided to give that a pass and took herself out to eat instead. Over a creamy seafood chowder, she looked up Kevin Williams online. She came to no conclusions about whether to be a teenager about him, but he seemed to be an excellent maker of boats. Monday morning, Kevin Williams stood near the local ferry dock, listening to seagulls and awaiting his newest client. They had already signed his standard contract, room and board and all necessary building supplies, provided while he built 2 boats, one for the client and one to sell. He expected to clear 150 shares, all profit. A share being what Americans used for money. That, plus a small completion bonus, would keep him solvent for 5 months, if he was careful. He always liked the beginning of new jobs, and this time his client, he spotted her coming towards him down the hill and his stomach flipped. She was slim, fit, confident, all elegant curves and light brown skin, the same shade as his but a different hue. Her black hair, threaded with silver, stood out from her head like the corona of a star. "Hey," she greeted him. "You have the tickets? I can take some of your stuff if you want." "I'm good. I'd be a pretty sorry individual if I couldn't handle my own crap." "I didn't say you couldn't handle it. I said you don't need to. Really, it's no trouble. My pack's almost empty now." "Elzy, would you believe that I know you're a strong, capable woman? If I need help, I really will ask." "There are men who won't. There are men who can't build you a canoe either." Actually, Kevin could barely breathe because of the weight of the portable woodshop on his back. He wasn't going to admit that to Elzy, though. The little local ferry, an old lobster boat with a new electric motor, hummed in and tied up. The passengers disembarked, and the father-daughter crew recharged the batteries and made some minor repairs. Finally, the new passengers, including Elzy and Kevin, could come aboard, find their seats, shed sweaters and jackets, and turn their faces to the sun. A few mare's tail clouds streaked the hard blue sky. The boat headed off again, humming, but not so loudly as to overcome the warble of the green, slightly turbid water along the hull. "Man, the sea!" Kevin exclaimed. "I can't get enough. It's like, God, it's like my soul is thirsty." "You're not from around here, are you?" Elzy asked. He, distracted, missed both the sarcasm in her voice and the fact that she must know where he was from, having seen his website. "No, I'm a prairie kid. I'd never seen anything like this until a few days ago." "It is gorgeous," Elzy acknowledged, and he suddenly realized what an ass he must sound like. "You're used to it," he said. "Oh, yes, but that's why I like it so much. Daddy and I lived on the island right after the pandemic. We had to move away when he got sick, but I couldn't wait to get back." He grinned at her, grateful, then realized what she'd said. "Wait, you're older than the pandemic?" Almost as soon as he said it, he wished he hadn't. He chewed his lip. "Sorry, I know, never ask a woman her age." "Older is what you get if you don't die first. I'm 41. "You look good for 41. "Why are you surprised? You think people my age can't look good?" "I try to flatter you. You just look younger, that's all." "So you don't think I look good?" "Now you're just being difficult." "Better than being easy." "I am not going there." Smart man. "Hey, is that a dolphin?" "No, harbor porpoise." "This is so cool." The ferry took a left out of the harbor, hugging the coast so closely they could see the brown and orange seaweed on the reddish rocks and the white spray of the rising tide. Eiders fished just offshore of the broken, stone-torn surf.
That was Bifurcation Events, written by Caroline Ailanthus and read by Eleanora Cage. This is an excerpt from the book Bifurcation Events by Caroline Ailanthus, Saltwater Media, 2024.
Hello, Caroline. Welcome back to The Strange Recital.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Last time you were with us, we talked about your novel Ecological Memory, and we met the character Elzy Rodriguez. So, apparently your new novel is a sequel. Tell us how the two books fit together, and give us a synopsis of the new book.
Okay, well, it's more than one story. It's a collection of thematically related stories that share a world in some of their characters. 5 short stories, 2 novellas, and 1 short novel. The novellas and most of the shorts are different perspectives on how the world of ecological memory happened, how the old civilization fell apart, how some people survived, how and why the survivors built the new civilization as they did. Elzy appears in 3 of the shorts and in the novel. In the novel, it's 15 years after ecological memory, and she has a boyfriend who has been dreaming about the Bar Harbor fire of 1947. That's a real historical event, by the way. Although the boyfriend has never heard of the fire before. So Elzy, with Andy's help, has to figure out how that's possible.
I have to ask about the title, which I assume comes from your science background. What are bifurcation events?
Your assumption is correct. Certain kinds of systems, system is a technical term there. Living beings are systems. I'm a system, you're a system.
Mm-hmm. I feel like a system.
There are other kinds of things that are systems. Certain kinds of systems, they're called complex systems. It's a category that includes living beings, but also some other things, can be very stable, just going along being pretty much exactly the same no matter what circumstances throw at them. And then very suddenly they change and start doing something completely different. Again, in a very stable way. That point of change is a bifurcation point or a bifurcation event. That's a technical term.
Mm-hmm.
A good example is one we all go through. Long before we're born, we suddenly change from being just a hollow ball of cells to being a tube with the beginning of anatomical structure. One really interesting thing about these events is that they're not predictable from prior conditions alone. So if you didn't already know that the little ball of cells was going to do that, you'd think, well, maybe it'll get bigger or something, but it's just going to stay a ball, right? Mm. That's what it's been doing this whole time. It's going to keep doing that. But no, it just suddenly changes. But the events aren't random. So if you've been studying embryonic development, you know perfectly well this is going to happen. You know the day it's going to happen. You might know the hour it's going to happen. So I'm using this phrase, sometimes metaphorically, sometimes literally, to refer to those moments in life that just seem to come out of nowhere and change everything, but they're not really random, and they're not imposed on us from outside force. They're just life knocking us on our butts, you know? And that's what all of these stories in the collection are about. That's the common theme.
Now, what we just heard was actually two excerpts. One from Elzy's childhood during a devastating pandemic, then another from her adulthood. Did you have the whole arc of the story planned before you wrote the first novel?
I didn't have it planned before writing the first novel, but I did have most of it planned before publishing the first novel. That is, I started on the short novel in bifurcation events before finishing Ecological Memory. And I had most of its plot and two of the shorts worked out before Ecological Memory launched. But both the novellas are newer than that. Both of them draw heavily on our experience of the COVID-19 lockdown and give a much more nuanced, more grounded vision of a society that's wobbling, shall we say. I didn't know how to do that yet, back when I wrote Ecological Memory.
Well, we've talked before about the writer's task of world building in a story like this. The unique challenge is to provide enough detail about, say, the technologies being used in this future world while avoiding foregrounding such details too much, so that the human story, perhaps even a love story, can be central. So Elzy hears the clip-clop of horse carts and the whine of an electric cop car in the street. So tell us about your approach to world building.
Well, there's world building, and then there's, call it world showing, what the reader gets. My approach to building fictional worlds is to get as much detail as I possibly can so that I can create the fictional world as I would write about the real one, as something that's just there. Then I can mention whatever details are relevant to the story and leave the others out. For example, if you were writing a scene where a character is making small talk, you might have them mention football. Your book's not about football. The scene isn't even about football. But you know football is something people small talk about, so there it is. Now, in this fictional world of mine, professional sports as we know them aren't a thing anymore because of the cost of rapid long-distance travel has become prohibitive. So instead, there's a kind of a sports involving augmented reality. The teams don't travel, they just put on AR goggles. I've got it all worked out, and it's nothing to do with the story. But there's one scene in here where somebody's making small talk, and so I had the AR games available to mention. The clip-clop of horse hooves you mentioned, that line is a little different. I'm not just drawing on relevant detail there. That's the beginning of the story. And so I needed to very quickly clue in the reader that on what sort of story this is. Clip-clop of horse hooves and the hum of an electric motor, that tells you that there's something unusual going on with the use of technology here. It warns you not to make assumptions because we're someplace new. That's the other thing about world showing. You have to consider what the reader really wants to know right now.
Yeah.
Now, I noticed one phrase I wanted to ask about, which is her contribution to the food reserve was due, and later, shares are mentioned as monetary currency. This made me wonder about the political and economic situation. It suggests a cooperative society, perhaps a form of socialism. Can you elaborate?
You ask good questions.
Well, we try.
Yeah, I wouldn't quite say socialism, but certainly closer to it than what we're used to. In general, this society leans socialist at small scales. There are a lot of publicly funded social services organized at the local level, but libertarian at large scales. And that's not necessarily my idea of the best way to run society, by the way.
No.
But it's a way and it fit the setting.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing with the money system isn't a particularly socialist element. Basically, you know how a gold standard works, right?
Yeah.
Every paper dollar is a certificate for a certain amount of gold that's stored somewhere, so you could take your dollar and exchange it for gold if you wanted. Advocates of the gold standard say that it reduces inflation by tying the value of money to something real, something with objective value. But gold doesn't actually have a lot of objective value.
No.
Mm-hmm.
You know what does? Food.
Of course.
So in this fictional world, America is on the food standard. The currency is the share, and each share is a certificate for food, water, and shelter for one person for one day. And because even non-perishable food eventually goes bad, landowners are responsible for periodically contributing to the food reserve. I've got the details all worked out, and they're pretty complicated, but the simple part is that prices aren't fixed. They vary according to market principles for better or worse, just like in our world. But however prices vary, one share is defined as the value of survival for one person for one day. The value of everything else changes in relation to that, because survival is the one thing whose value really doesn't change.
Yes. Now, you write, quote, those who survived, like Elzy and her father, did so by becoming self-sufficient, defending tiny garden patches and hunting grounds, one family or several together, each group alone, end quote. So that emphasis on self-sufficiency, I found that I liked very much. But then you ask, why hadn't the survivors stayed that way, isolated and safe? Well, humans are social animals, right? Maybe we can't help ourselves. What do you think?
Well, I intended that as a rhetorical question.
Mm-hmm.
In that scene, Elzy is thinking about this guy she likes. And she's had a few bad experiences before and kind of wants to play it safe, but then she thinks that if everybody played it safe, we wouldn't have society at all. Because you're right, we are social animals. There are exceptions, humans who really don't feel a need for human connection and would rather be hermits. But for most of us, social connection is what makes life worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, it's a risk. And you have to mitigate that risk. Be self-sufficient up to a point. Don't date dangerous people, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But you can't make the risk go away entirely. And for most of it, human society is worth the risk because we are social animals. It's part of being human.
Yes.
I'm curious, if the entire fossil fuel infrastructure has collapsed, how's the heavy-duty mineral extraction for manufacturing electrical vehicle batteries accomplished, which all currently depends on fossil fuel, as well as the manufacturing and distribution of consumer goods, and even the internet infrastructure?
Another good question. I can't give you specifics on whether lithium mining could be done without fossil fuels or some other technology might work for electric car batteries or things like that. I don't literally figure out everything when I world build.
Mm-hmm.
However, in general, we're looking at a society that uses a variety of energy sources, including renewable electricity generation, both with and without storage batteries, biofuels of various kinds, and good old-fashioned muscle power, both human and animal. But we're also looking at a society that uses a lot less energy than we're used to. That's why my characters mostly walk everywhere. That's why so much of their food is seasonal and local. That's why nobody really has a lot of stuff. I think it's mentioned in the first book, but the internet is a lot smaller than what we're used to. And of course, the population is a lot smaller. I think the United States is currently somewhere around 350 million. Well, in this world, it's about 25 million.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference as far as resource use. So the take-home message is that we absolutely can do without fossil fuels, but it will take some real change. Changes are coming anyway. That's what unsustainable means, right? Cannot be sustained. What I'm trying to do is show that those changes can be positive and that the world of the future doesn't have to necessarily be completely alien. How the real world specifics of that will work, whether there will be lithium batteries or whatever, I don't know that.
Yeah, well, as we talked about last time, what you're doing with these novels is something you call post-apocalyptic optimism.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, that's one of the reasons we feature your books, because they step outside the genre conventions of dystopian sci-fi. I'm wondering, do you feel challenged to find an audience when it seems the market wants darkness, doom, and violence?
I don't think the market does want doom and gloom. I think most people want the darkness they see around them acknowledged, and then they want reason for hope. They want a hero to fight through the darkness. Dystopian stories are full of heroes. I acknowledge darkness, difficulty, pain. My characters very much grapple with all of that. I just don't have them grappling with it alone. And I put more emphasis on the reason for hope, perhaps, than some other stories do. There are a lot of stories out there that are very optimistic. Star Trek comes to mind. Even the so-called new Treks, which are definitely grittier, are optimistic and idealistic at bottom. And Star Trek remains incredibly popular. The big difference in what I'm doing is bringing an optimistic vision to the reality that our current way of life cannot continue. Nor should it.
Yeah.
But it's a physical impossibility. We don't have that option. And that's something you don't see in Star Trek, where it seems like, well, everything just got better and better and better. That's not necessarily going to happen. But what I'm saying is that we can live through change, even very radical change, and we can find or make something good on the other side. And I don't know anyone who doesn't want that to be true. And I think it is true.
Great. Yes.
You've just launched this book via saltwatermedia.com, and it's available from the usual online booksellers. Do you have any other writing projects in the works?
Oh, yeah. I have several more in this series in various stages, sitting on various back burners. And I'm also working on my first foray into high fantasy. That's going to be my next book after this one, is the high fantasy. Now it's my version of high fantasy. So there's still going to be lots of science. And the central conflict will involve a civil war over environmental justice issues. But there will be elves with cool swords and stuff like that. So that'll be fun.
Would you call that a sword and science novel?
Yeah, maybe. That works.
A whole new genre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again.
Okay, good. Well, great, Carolyn. Good luck with that next project. And once again, we thank you for contributing to our podcast.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. It's been fun.
Sometimes I think we're in the midst of an apocalypse right now. Are you optimistic?
Of course. The future's so bright I wear sunglasses, even in bed. This is The Strange Recital, on the web at thestrangerecital.com. The music on this episode was Autumn Sunset by Audionautics. This is episode 24051.